How does the Indian government respond to global investors when they come to India, and how does local priorities and local concerns get reflected in these interactions? Well, it's true that increasingly in the last decade or so, concerns on livelihoods, concerns on environment, concerns on impact on water resources. These have become very concerns on land acquisition. These are all very serious issues that have emerged now on the agenda. And the government, for the first time, is now faced with a situation where it has to balance the imperatives of getting investment and the imperatives of actually fulfilling some local priorities. I mean, to give you a concrete example, we are right now in the midst of redoing a 117-year-old law which governs the principle of eminent domain. Those of you who are from Nalsar will know the 117-year-old law which governs the principle of eminent domain, the Land Acquisition Act of 1894. We are now in the midst of rewriting it. On the one side, investors want a Land Acquisition Act which is speedy, which is businesslike, and which is conducive to investment. On the other hand, there are people who say that the state should have no role in land acquisition. The private investors should go and buy the land if at all they need the land, and where the land has to be acquired, it has to be under very clearly circumscribed circumstances. So there is a trade-off that you have to have, and I think the trade-off is difficult. There are difficult answers. There are no pre-cooked answers to give. There are many situations where governments will have to give overriding importance to the concerns of investors. There will be times in which the government will have to give overriding priority to the concerns of local interest groups and local stakeholders. And it is in this democratic process of give and take that you will find a set of compromises. It's going to be very messy. It's not going to be easy. Because I think investors also have to realize that there are now a series of interest groups in societies, in democratic societies, which are claiming their share of the decision-making pie. The third question: what is the role of civil society in development issues? Well, I think it's a very active role. It's a pain in the butt role, but it's a very essential role. It's a role that, in democracies, one cannot run away from. It's a role that is designed to slow decision making. It's a role that is designed to create controversies. But it's a role that has to be confronted. It is a role that has to be managed. And it is a role that you have to engage with. To give you an example, which Dr. Bhargava must have already spoken to you about, the whole issue of transgenic food crops in India is now a very important issue. Should we have transgenic brinjal? Should we have transgenic rice? Should we have transgenic wheat? Should we have transgenic, cabbage, tomato? I mean, all sorts. Everything is every scientists are working, the employed scientists, not the unemployed scientists. The employed scientists are working on all these transgenic crops. And civil society has a view on all these things. Now, how does civil society's concerns get reflected in decision making? I adopted an approach when I was Minister for Environment, saying that I will listen to civil society. So I organized in 8 different cities of India open democratic forums, and 8,000 people participated, 1,000 in each of these forums. And I got different views. I heard some civil society organizations accused me of being Monsanto's paid agent. Monsanto's scientists accused me of being an activist. So I listened to all these points of view, and then I took a final call. But that process of engagement has to be institutionalized. It cannot be left to the whims and fancies of one individual. It has to be institutionalized, because I think civil society is now getting in today's paradox is that the anti-globalizers have taken the maximum advantage of globalization. It's the anti-globalizers who have, all the information at their fingertips much faster than even governments have. And therefore, I think it would be a tragedy if civil society organizations are not given an institutional role. in the making of legislation, in the formulation of policy, in the implementation of policy, in the evaluation of policy. But this also means an enormous responsibility on civil society organizations. Because unfortunately, the distinction between being a civil society organization and being a Luddite organization becomes very thin. The challenge for a civil society organization really is to point out the pitfalls in a particular course of action without necessarily being seen to be anti-growth or anti-development. Because that really is no government, let alone a democratically elected government, can be seen to be insensitive to economic concerns, to concerns of livelihood, to concerns of jobs, to concerns of increasing prosperity. And if civil society organization interventions only help to depress economic growth, then I think the sustainability of these interventions will get called into question. So I think the responsibility is equally as much on government to institutionalize civil society interactions. The responsibility is also on civil society organizations to show a certain degree of integrity in information, to a certain degree of reliability in the information that they put out, and a willingness to listen. I'm sorry to say, but, and I'm sure Saida would also bear me out, one characteristic of civil society organizations in our country particularly, wonderfully inarticulate, but totally deaf. They will speak with eloquence and vehemence, but they are simply not willing to listen to any other point of view, however different that point of view may be to them. Now, I'm not defending government procedures or government institutions, but I'm just telling you, as somebody who has had perhaps the maximum experience and continues to have the maximum experience of dealing with civil society organizations, if you're not, dialogue is always a two-way process. A role has to be a two-way process. There has to be give and take. There are no absolutes in the world. There are shades of gray. And if you operate in a black and white environment, in a binary environment, I don't think that you are going to get much progress in decision making on very complex issues like health, environment, nuclear energy, or what have you. Finally, the question that you asked, what is India's changing role in global engagement? Well, I think certainly as India becomes economically more powerful, as India becomes more economically more prosperous, it will seek for itself a new role. But where India will have to, I think India also has to undergo many changes in its own approach to global engagement, is that a global engagement is always a give and take. A country that seeks global engagement has also to be in a position to negotiate that global engagement. It's not a given. There is a process of compromise. There is a process of give and take. We are still defensive on many matters. But I think India is now beginning to be a little more proactive, beginning to be seen and heard in international forums in a constructive way. The second important lesson that India has learnt in global negotiations is that you must have a multilateral anchor, but the name of the game is bilateral. That you have these multilateral forums, you have the United Nations and you have the G77, which is actually G134, but these are actually forums for talk and adding to global warming. They are not forums for action. They are not forums designed to create the UN law of the seas being negotiated for the last 27 years. So these are not designed to give you structures that will implement agreements. So by all means have a multilateral anchor, but really it's the bilaterals that gives the power. And what you need to do is to find a creative middle path between anchored in this multilateral process of the United Nations system, but at the same time have the flexibility in the innovativeness to work out bilateral deals. The Chinese are experts in this. They don't take their international rhetoric seriously. They have a rhetoric internationally, but when it comes to action, they are pretty much domestic and bilateral oriented. I have seen this in environment, I've seen this in trade, and I've seen this in many other areas. But with a multilateral anchor, have as many bilateral niches for engagement is a lesson that India will have to learn. The third lesson for India in the emerging global context, of course, is more difficult for us, which is that in international negotiations and global governance, style is more important than substance. Indians have always been known for substance, but never been known for their style. Our ability to put a square bracket and a footnote at the drop of a hat makes us ideal negotiators in WHO and UNCTAD and WTO and all these UN organizations. But a country that is becoming much more economically powerful, a country that wants to be taken as a serious player internationally, can no longer be a procrastinator, can no longer be a naysayer, can no longer hide behind the poverty curtain, however real that may be. It will have to be a little more proactive. Its style will have to undergo much more of a change, and it has to be much more engaging. The ability to listen, the ability to craft a compromise, the ability to actually negotiate. I think these are very important changes that I see on the horizon, and that will come as we gain more and more experience in different forums. I think the global governance on health conclave that you're having couldn't have been timed at a much more opportune moment. Because the 12th five-year plan, which is about to be unveiled, has been unveiled, which will be about to be sort of implemented, the one sector that has got the maximum attention is health. I mean, it's in terms of allocations, in terms of just in terms of the importance that the plan gives. For the first time, I think the 12th five-year plan is founded. The three principles are faster growth, sustainable growth, and inclusive growth. And health is central for each of these three pillars. So I think for the first time in India today, you have a political establishment willing to back the rhetoric of a commitment to health with actual allocations, with actual money, with actual public investment. And that, to my mind, is a very major step forward. And any ideas that we get from experience from other countries would be of enormous value for us. I think with the innovations that have taken place in different parts of the world, we are committed to universal health coverage. I think that's a very important announcement that our Prime Minister made a couple of months ago. Now, what that contents of that universal health coverage should be is now being debated. But the notion that we must move towards universal health coverage is now deeply embedded in the political consciousness. And I think your deliberations would go a long way in giving that movement far greater momentum. Thank you very much.